Okay, hi. I'm going to talk about two books I read. These books are about English-speaking institutions. Uh, what do I? What does this really have to do with anything? Well, we speak English. There's institutions. There's a lot of political conversation today about the role of institutions. What's fair? What's the right thing? You can go on the internet and learn all about different kinds of institutions. And I think that's an interesting kind of conversation. I wanted to talk about these two history books, and they're kind of economically inclined. The first one is called The Long Process of Development, Building Market States in Pre-Industrial England, Spain, and Their Colonies. The other one is Making Money, Coin Currency, and the Coming of Capitalism. And so these books are about, they kind of relate to economic development, but we're going to go all the way back to the beginning of English-speaking institutions of the age of Old English. And so I will start with, of these two books, the kind of the fiscal and military side of things. Long Process of Development is going to be a little more military, and Making Money is going to be a little more fiscal. And they are about, so they're going to look at the same institution, and they're also going to have an economic mindset, but there's some differences. There's sort of different types of perspectives. So I'm going to start with Making Money because they go a little bit further back. They start in the Anglo-Saxon age. I guess they quote one historian saying that the 400s was sort of ground zero for zero money in the Dark Ages. And so how did that process start anew during the medieval period? And this sort of, if we think of history in terms of just global trade, it starts with people being slightly remote. They are unfamiliar with long distance trade, and over time they figure out more advantages to trade further and further, and that helps create people's patterns of behavior, and even how those patterns of behavior fit in within a hierarchical institution. So why does a central government make money? I guess, print money, mint money. And this book says basically so you can pay your taxes. That's why the king's heads on coins and things like that, because it's his government issuing those coins. So that's kind of the main thrust. You give. It's all right. It's your finger. Okay. So in ancient times where there wasn't a lot of control and the same degrees of social order, people might be a lot more vulnerable to violence. In ancient times, there's this question of sort of the raid or trade. Do you trade with your neighbors, get say a zero-sum gain, slowly over time, finding agreement, making better trades, creating more resources collectively, building up technology. And then the other side is the raid side, which is more of I'm going to take something from my neighbor and they can't do anything about it, and maybe I'll go back every year and raid them and extort tribute. So this book talks a lot about different roles of, say, violence and how they establish and set up institutions. So an important term is one from Mancur Olson called the monopoly of force, or the greatest capacity for violence. And what that means is that whoever has the greatest amount of force gets to sort of have a say-so in how things are run, and then they can exact transaction costs, So if they are protecting or guarding a market, they get to exact, they get to tax people basically, instead of stealing from them, with their, monopoly of force or whatever. They can now, they can tax people. It's a more of a win-win than them fighting. So so that's sort of the role of the stationary bandit. Now, before the stationary bandit, there was a roving bandit. These bandits that come around, they wander the countryside, cause problems for people around the area, and then you have what is a stationary bandit, which is someone that, they have a headquarters. They have a certain place. Maybe if you cross through their turf or land, you have to pay them a tax. like paying a turnpike toll or crossing a bridge, paying a bridge toll, that's on their property. They might have, those are sorts of strategies, or, taxing people to use the marketplace. And then, of course, they can get a further promotion to become a stake-holding stationary bandit, where they're minting coin, and that's giving them a stake in making these things, these economic forces help work towards their own end of maintaining power and control. So this book is going to really pick up what they call 1066 to about roughly 1265, I guess, would be the first phase of English history and their institutions, what they call the pre-state. Now, before this, they talked about the Anglo-Saxon period, that no one could really exert force more than a day's horse ride away. So there's sort of this limitation of how effective a central government really can be, only about a day's horse ride away. So you have William the Conqueror, or whatever, 1066, come in. Him and the Normans are the last of the roving bandits to ever enter England and, establish their social order. Since then, English history, that's why 1066 is important. But so as as the Normans are going to settle and conquer, and especially in the first century, they're going to do a lot of the more force end of things, exerting tribute. There's being kind of a brute, and they're going to have to slowly figure out how we can, develop markets, basically, not chase down the peasants, but get the peasants to, produce agricultural surpluses and things like that. So how do you find stages of agreement? And so making money is going to pick back up around the reign of Henry II. And Henry II created the free minting system, which was a way to attract different merchants to bring silver so they could put them in the mint. So you get these German silver miners or whatever, you say, come trade in my market, up. You have this silver bullion. It's like Coinstar, put your coin in the mint. I'm going to take a certain cut, a certain percentage of the coin, but you'll get the rest, and you can trade in my market for all these great things with this new shiny silver. So that's sort of a magnet. I guess around the 1150s, Henry II puts his treasury in Westminster. So that's sort of the beginning slow process of developing that. They're going to, throughout the 1200s, there's going to be more licensed markets. They're going to have a new legal procedure to license markets where they have, it's a more effective ways of taxing, basically. And there's, of course, lots of ups and downs throughout medieval economics. Coin debasement, what's that mean? How does the whole financial system, even though it's medieval, how does it sort of operate and slowly sort of lead us to where we are today. Now, long process of development it's going to pick back up in the late 1200s and 1265, when they say that Henry III, instead of Henry II, became the first sort of effective manager of London. He was able to sort of clamp down and control London, and then he slowly expanded where he could tax further and further out until about the end of the War of the Roses, when a lot of these things were established in the 1480s. So those were just sort of some brief comparisons about some things that were discussed between those two books. And I will talk some other time.